Welcome to the hidden tale of the Book of Witness. Subscribe and comment down below where you're listening to this story from. Settle down, breathe, loosen your jaw, and relax your shoulders. What follows is not scripture, but a story preserved in fragments, retold as myth, memory, and warning, passed down through those who feared what the heavens once unleashed. This is the story erased from scripture, the watchers, and the chaos they unleashed. They were angels, sent to watch over mankind, guardians from the heavens. But they didn't just watch, they fell, they lusted, they taught forbidden knowledge. They fathered giants, they corrupted the world. This chapter is from the point of view of the first-person witness, son of Jared. Witness believes these things happened, but the story never confirms they are objectively true. Chapter 1, Watchers of the Early World. In the days before the Great Flood, when the world was young and humanity still in its infancy, I walked the earth as a man among simpler men. My name is Witness, son of Jared, and I have been witness to wonders and horrors that many cannot imagine. From the vantage of my long life and the visions granted to me by the Most High, I recount now the secret tale of the Watchers, those heavenly beings tasked to observe mankind, who instead fell from grace. Even now, centuries later, I remember the hush of the early world. There were giants in the earth in those days, and angels above watching over us. We humans lived close to the soil under the eyes of the eternal order, unaware that divine beings kept vigil from the heights of heaven. The Watchers were meant to be our silent guardians. They were a host of 200 angels, mighty and radiant, appointed by the eternal order to observe the burgeoning human race. From the unseen realms they watched us grow, build our first simple cities, and raise our children under the sun and stars. At first the Watchers fulfilled their duty faithfully. Through day and night, through the turning of seasons, they observed and guided subtly, without showing themselves. I was but a child when I first heard whispers of their presence. My father Jared spoke of feeling eyes watching from the sky, benign yet powerful. In my innocence I imagined gentle spirits in the clouds, pleased with mankind's simple songs and offerings to heaven. Little did I know then the truth of those whispers. The Watchers were indeed watching, but not all their hearts remained pure in their observation. Among those divine sentinels there stirred a restlessness, for as they watched us, some of them began to feel an unexpected longing. It started innocently perhaps, a curiosity about the lives of men and women, about our daily toil, our laughter, our sorrow. But curiosity turned to fascination, and fascination to desire. In my later years, I was granted visions of those hidden times. I saw it as though I stood among the Watchers themselves, gazing down upon the earth. From the lofty peaks of the upper realms, a host of angels looked below where mortal women and men dwelt. The women of earth were beautiful, radiant in youth, tender in love and sorrow, their hair catching the sunlight as they bathed in rivers or gathered grain in the fields. They were not like the ageless, ethereal females of the angels, for mortal women possessed an earthier lure, a warmth and vitality that the heavenly beings found strangely captivating. Among the angels was a leader named Samyaza. He was a mighty prince among Watchers, wise, authoritative, and one of the first created to guard mankind. It was he who first voiced what many had silently felt. In my vision I heard his deep voice tremble as he spoke to his closest companions. "Do you see them, brothers?" Samyaza said, pointing toward the twinkling lights of campfires dotting the earth at twilight. "These daughters of men, how fair and graceful they are. Have you ever beheld such beauty in all our eternal days?" There was a yearning in his tone that gave pause to the others. The other Watchers shifted uneasily. They all had observed the mortals, but none had dared speak of what stirred in their hearts. One angel, Azazel, known later for his boldness, stepped forward next to Samyaza. A strange light danced in Azazel's eyes as he peered downward. "I have watched them," Azazel admitted quietly. "I have watched the women of earth plait flowers in their hair and dance, and I have felt envy." The word hung in the air. Envy, a feeling unknown to angels who wanted for nothing in the upper realms. Some watchers recoiled at Azazel's confession. Others nodded slowly, for they too had begun to crave what mortals had: companionship, sensuality, the messiness and vibrancy of human life. I saw one angel, Sariel, wrap his arms around himself as if troubled. "We were sent to guide and observe," Sariel reminded them, his voice quavering, "not to partake in their lives. To break the barrier between the upper realms and earth is forbidden." Samyaza's eyes flashed. "Forbidden, yes," he replied. "But is it not a lonely task we've been given? To watch and never join. These humans laugh and love under the sun while we remain apart, untouched by what they feel. Why should we, who are so powerful, be denied the joys of life that even the lowliest mortal experiences?" A murmur passed through the assembly of watchers. There atop the boundary of the upper realms, the seeds of rebellion took root in their hearts. In truth, it was more than simple lust or loneliness that tempted them. It was pride as well, the idea that they knew better than the eternal order, what was right for themselves. They believed they could take what they desired and still fulfill their divine duties, that they could have both the upper realms' honor and earth's pleasures. All the while I listened in my vision, my heart heavy, for I knew the tragedy that would follow. But in that moment, the watchers convinced themselves their cause was just. Samyaza's charisma swayed many. Even those uneasy began to imagine what it would be to walk openly on earth, to hold a beloved close, to father children of their own flesh and spirit. At length, Samyaza gathered the entire host of 200 watchers on a great height. Some say it was the summit of Mount Hermon, a lonely peak that crowned the borderlands of the world below. The night was dark and moonless when they descended near enough to converse freely away from the upper realms' immediate gaze. A wind whispered over the rugged mountain top as the watchers stood in a circle, their white raiments rippling. Lightning flickered on the horizon, as if nature herself sensed the momentous decision about to be made. Samyaza stood at the center, his angelic form towering and radiant, though his face was tense with doubt and desire. One by one, the watchers looked to their leader. They awaited his word to break the chains of the upper realms' command. Yet Samyaza hesitated. Though desire burned in him, fear gnawed at him too. If they transgressed the divine law by taking human wives, punishment from the eternal order would surely follow, perhaps even annihilation. Samyaza's resolve wavered as he imagined himself alone facing the eternal order's wrath. If the others lost their nerve, he spoke into the silence. "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed," he said, "and I alone shall have to pay the price of this great sin." His admission echoed against the crags. He was afraid, and with good reason, that the others might abandon him after he took the first fateful step. But Azazel stepped forward, placing a hand on Samyaza's shoulder. "You will not be alone," Azazel proclaimed firmly, eyes blazing with conviction. "Let us all swear an oath, bind ourselves together in this. We share the risk and the blame as one." A ripple of relief and determination swept through the gathered angels. They raised their right hands together under the swirling sky. With voices as one, they made a binding vow among themselves. Though I was not there in body, through the vision I felt the electricity in the air as they swore. Each one to go through with this bold defiance no matter the cost. "We swear," the watchers intoned, their myriad voices melding into a solemn chorus, "to take for ourselves the daughters of men as wives, to descend from the upper realms and dwell among them. We swear that none of us will turn back, and if punishment falls, it falls upon us all. Thus the oath was sealed. The very peak of Hermon shuddered beneath their feet as they finished speaking. A sudden gust of wind hissed through the crags, and a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, as if nature itself quaked at their decision. In doing so, they felt a grim exhilaration, a point of no return. In that thunderous moment on Mount Hermon, 200 holy watchers became in their hearts rebels against the upper realm. From that day the mountain's name itself would bear witness to their pact. Hermon meaning accursed, for on it they swore and bound themselves to a course that would bring a curse upon them. I often think of that moment, the tipping point where desire overcame duty. The night the first angels fell not by force, but by their own choice. Silently I watched in my vision as the company of watchers prepared to descend fully to the world of mortals and make their desire a reality. Samyaza took one last gaze at the stars above, perhaps wondering if the eternal order watched and what judgment awaited. Azazel's jaw was set in determination, already anticipating the new experiences to come. Others exchanged excited, nervous glances as they shed the last of their hesitation. And so, under the cover of night, the watchers left their stations in the heavens. These brilliant beings, whose presence had been unseen guardianship, now set foot upon the earth. For a brief moment the night seemed to hold its breath as those celestial beings crossed the threshold into the mortal realm. Samyaza knelt and touched the damp earth. The first time heavenly flesh met terrestrial soil, a tremor of both dread and thrill coursed through him. There was no turning back now. Their arrival would soon be felt in every village and town, though mankind would not immediately understand what had come among them. I did not witness their descent with my own eyes, but those alive then recounted strange phenomena. They spoke of falling stars streaking across the sky that night, dozens of them, as if heaven itself were raining. No one guessed the truth, that each star was a watcher, a heavenly angel blazing down to earth. In the stillness of pre-dawn, the 200 landed upon the earth, their radiance dimmed to avoid blinding the humans, and some took on the appearance of mortal men so as not to sow fear. In secret they entered the settlements of humanity, hearts pounding with anticipation of the lives they would now lead openly among us. Thus began a new, fateful chapter in the early days of the world. The Watchers had forsaken the upper realms' command, and walked among the children of men, intent on claiming the mortal women they so desired. And while humanity slept, unaware of the celestial transgression unfolding in their midst, the seeds were sown for a great upheaval that would change creation forever. Chapter 2. The Wives of the Watchers. Dawn broke over a changed world. The Watchers, now earthbound by their own choice, moved among the sons and daughters of men. At first they concealed much of their glory to walk unnoticed. They came as strangers with a mysterious air, tall and noble-looking, with eyes that held the glow of the heavens. It was not long before rumors spread of godlike men appearing in villages, in marketplaces, by the wells where women drew water. I remember the first time I heard such a rumor. An old shepherd from the east came to my father's tent, speaking of a visitor in white robes who had appeared in his village. The stranger had knowledge of things no mortal could know, and strength beyond any man. He had helped lift a fallen tree that no dozen men could budge, earning the awe of the villagers. Whispers said he must be one of the ancient powers come down to bless them, and bless them he did, or so it seemed then, for this radiant visitor took a liking to one of the shepherd's own daughters, a girl renowned for her beauty and kindness. It was not an isolated tale across the land. Similar stories emerged, mysterious men of peerless appearance arriving in settlements and courting the daughters of men. Some came bearing gifts, gold and gemstones that shone like captured sunlight, or finely wrought ornaments the likes of which no human craftsman could fashion. Others offered knowledge and counsel, solving disputes and healing ailments with a touch. With such favor and wonder, the hearts of many families were won over. Imagine a humble father or mother seeing their daughter wooed by a being who seemed at once human and divine. In those days, no mortal truly understood what an angel was. They only knew these visitors were unlike any ordinary suitor. Many parents felt honored that such powerful ones would seek their daughters' hands. Weddings were arranged beneath the open sky. The Watchers, in order to legitimize their unions, took the women as wives in the sight of their families, swearing vows as ancient as the stars. Perhaps they thought by imitating the marriage covenant, they could lessen the sin of their transgression. I was told of one such ceremony by my grandfather Mahalalel, who had witnessed it while traveling. He described it to me in hushed tones, disbelief still in his eyes. They stood beneath an oak tree, he said of the couple. The bride was trembling, but not with fear, rather with awe. The man who took her hand was no mortal man. Tall he was, with hair the color of burnished copper, and eyes like blue flame. When he spoke his vows, it was as if thunder murmured in the distance, and when he smiled at her, she seemed to fall into a trance of joy. The bride's family and the whole village celebrated, enthralled by the union. They feasted and danced, believing a god had chosen one of their own. And indeed, the Watchers allowed themselves to be regarded as divine or semi-divine. They did not correct the mortals who offered them reverence. Some even encouraged it, basking in the adulation and worship that rightly belonged only to the eternal order of the upper realms. One by one, the 200 Watchers each found a woman who pleased them. Samyaza, the leader, chose for himself a woman of singular grace, named Ishba, the daughter of a chieftain. It was said that Ishba had hair as dark as a raven's wing, and eyes like the deep waters of a well. Samyaza was captivated by her quiet strength and gentle spirit. At first Ishba was frightened of the towering stranger who had come for her, but he courted her with patience. He taught her parents new farming techniques that doubled their harvest, easing their life. He sang to Ishba in a voice like a distant echo of the upper realms, until her fear melted into love. In time she looked upon him with devotion, believing he was a benevolent deity come to take her to a blessed life. Samyaza wed her under a canopy of stars, and those who witnessed the union spoke of angels flying overhead, showering blessings, though in truth those were likely other Watchers attending unseen. Meanwhile, Azazel was not content with quiet courtship. Bold and brash, Azazel revelled in showing off his heavenly prowess. He descended upon a prosperous town at the foot of a great mountain. There he demonstrated miraculous skills. He taught the blacksmiths of the town to melt iron ore and forge it into tools and weapons sharper than anyone had seen. Before the awestruck townsfolk, he shaped a gleaming sword from raw metal with his bare hands, unaffected by the heat of the forge. His feat made him a figure of fear and admiration. Among those who watched Azazel's every move was a young maiden named Nama, the daughter of the chief metalsmith. She was independent and intelligent, her eyes alight with curiosity. Azazel was drawn to her immediately, perhaps because he saw in her a hunger for knowledge that mirrored his own. Nama, in turn, was fascinated by Azazel's skills and confident power when he offered to take her as his wife, promising to teach her secrets of the earth and adorn her with the finest jewels he could craft. She agreed. Their union was more than romantic. It was a partnership built on shared ambition. Nama learned eagerly from Azazel, and under his tutelage she became the first woman to adorn her eyes with crushed coal, a dark powder, and paint her face, enhancing her beauty in ways never before seen. The women of the town soon imitated her, and Azazel smiled to see how readily humans embraced the arts he introduced. Not all unions were born of gentle love or curious consent. Some watchers, inflamed by lust, took women by force or deception. These were dark occurrences spoken of only in terrified whispers. One such tale reached my ears of an angel called Turiel, who became obsessed with a woman already betrothed to a mortal man. When she resisted his advances, Turiel's desire turned to rage. One night, he swept into her home in a swirl of wind, striking down her would-be husband. The village awoke to thunderous cries as Turiel carried the weeping Sum off into the sky. Her kin mourned, powerless to retaliate against a being of the sky. The next they heard, she had become Turiel's unwilling wife in a distant land, and none could rescue her. Thus, through charm or coercion, flattery or fear, the Watchers fulfilled their oath. They all took for themselves human wives. Each fallen angel became a husband, and soon these unions bore fruit. The women conceived children by them, children who were far from ordinary. But even before those offspring arrived, the presence of the Watchers profoundly changed human society. With wives and households to care for, the fallen angels did not remain wanderers. They established dwellings, some built grand houses, or even primitive cities with the help of their supernatural knowledge. They taught their new families and neighbors many advanced skills, which at first were received as blessings. You see, the Watchers had access to knowledge kept from mankind's early generations. What had once been the slow learning of trial and error sped forward dramatically under their tutelage. In those days I traveled often teaching righteousness, and so I saw with my own eyes the transformations across communities. I saw fields that had been barren now yielding abundant crops, because a Watcher taught the farmers the secrets of irrigation and the timing of the rains. I saw previously nomadic tribes settle and build sturdy homes of stone, because an angel showed them how to cut rock from the quarries and stack them strong. In one village by the sea, a Watcher named Tamiel unveiled the knowledge of the stars. Night after night he climbed a hill with the people and pointed out the constellations, teaching them to read the skies as a map and calendar. From Tamiel, humans learned to navigate their ships by the stars and to mark the seasons for planting and harvest. Another Watcher, Penemia, fascinated the scribes of a certain city by revealing the secrets of writing. He showed them how to make ink from soot and plant oils, and how to etch symbols representing words onto clay tablets and animal skins. The people marveled as knowledge that was once passed only by tongue could now be recorded for generations. Even the healing arts advanced. A Watcher called Castea taught the properties of herbs and roots, how certain plants could cure fever or ease pain. Midwives and healers became suddenly more effective, saving lives with remedies they previously wouldn't have imagined. To the untrained eye, these gifts seemed unquestionably good. Many humans celebrated the Watchers as benefactors and saviors, bringing enlightenment. My heart was conflicted in those times. I too marveled at some of these advances. Who would not rejoice to see disease cured or harvests multiplied? And yet something in the pit of my stomach churned with unease. For every gift of knowledge carries a double edge, and the hearts of men are easily corrupted. Signs of that corruption soon emerged. Azazal's teachings especially began to bear bitter fruit. With the introduction of finely wrought weapons, disputes that once ended in harsh words or at worst a bruising fistfight now ended in bloodshed. A trivial argument over grazing land between two clans escalated into a battle with bronze swords and barbed spears. I came upon the aftermath of that battle during my travels. Bodies of young men strewn across the valley, the earth soaked red. Women wailed over their fallen sons and husbands. It was a level of carnage previously unknown among our people. In the marketplace of another town, I saw a petty theft turn deadly when the thief brandished a dagger of gleaming iron, learned from Azazel's forge. Instead of mere scolding or restitution, the confrontation ended with a life snuffed out in seconds. The ease of killing had grown. Meanwhile, Azazel's wife Nama and her companions spread the art of cosmetics and rich adornment among the women. In moderation there was no harm, but vanity and seduction soon followed. I observed once modest maidens competing to outshine each other with painted faces and bejeweled dresses. Some began to use their enhanced charms to lure men into illicit encounters, betraying bonds of marriage and kin for the promise of passion or favors. Jealousy and strife grew within households as fidelity was tested and often found wanting. Worst of all was the spread of sorcery and occult knowledge taught by some of the watchers. Semjaza, for so Samyaza's name was often pronounced by the people, himself taught enchantments, ways to bind and manipulate using incantations and the cutting of roots. What he passed off as harmless wisdom about plants and animals turned into the practice of witchcraft among men and women, hungry for power. I heard whispers of love potions brewed to ignite lust or hatred in unwitting victims, of charms to curse rivals or poisons crafted to eliminate an enemy in secret. Another watcher, Amaros, taught how to undo spells, a knowledge that may seem benign until one realized he only needed to teach it because so many spells were being cast in the first place. The divination of the heavens became corrupted as well. Those who learned the paths of stars and moon from the watchers took that knowledge and twisted it into astrology and false prophecy. Instead of observing the sky to understand seasons as the eternal order intended, people began consulting the stars as if they were gods themselves that decreed fate. Kokabel, who taught the constellations, and Barakijol, who taught astrology, found themselves revered as high priests of celestial law. Some mortals started to worship the sun, moon, and stars, believing that by reading them they could control their destinies, thus drifting further from reverence of the true Creator. I traveled through these lands speaking out against the excess and idolatry I witnessed. A few listened to me, a small few. Most were enthralled to the new wonders bestowed by the Watchers. It was as if humanity, in gaining new knowledge and power so quickly, lacked the wisdom to use it rightly. We were children with razor-sharp swords, cutting ourselves even as we tried to wield them. And behind it all, the Watchers reigned as the new elite. Each had carved a domain of influence and was often regarded with fear and admiration in equal measure. They wore the pride of their achievements like crowns. In public they were still handsome and wise teachers to their human subjects, but in private I suspect some felt the first gnawings of doubt. They had done what they set out to do, taken wives, indulged their desires, shared knowledge freely, and the world was indeed changing as a result. Were these changes for the better? If any of the Watchers asked themselves this, their pride largely smothered the question. Azazel, in particular, stood unrepentant. He gloried in the fact that entire armies now clashed with weapons he had introduced. He told himself that it was man's choice to misuse the knowledge. He had only opened the door to advancement. Samyaza, indulging in the pleasures of his beautiful wife and the authority he wielded over his city, quieted any misgivings by losing himself in earthly delights. As months turned to years, the darker consequences of the Watchers' actions continued to spread. It was a slow poison. The arts and sciences they taught advanced human civilization, yes, but simultaneously eroded the innocence and relative peace that once existed. Greed, violence, lust, and deception all flourished under the tutelage of those who had themselves rebelled against divine law. Yet the greatest consequence was still to come, a consequence that grew silently in the wombs of the Watchers' human wives. Unbeknownst to all, something unprecedented was coming into the world. A generation of children born of both the upper realms and earth. The first of those children would soon draw breath, and with them, new chaos would be unleashed upon creation. Chapter 3. The Children of the Watchers. For a time it seemed the world was enjoying a strange prosperity under the Watchers' influence despite the undercurrents of wickedness. But soon a new phenomenon shook mankind, one that could not be ignored or glossed over as a mixed blessing. This was the birth of the children fathered by the Watchers. These offspring were unlike any the world had seen. I remember the day the first of these children was born in our settlement. Her name was Ava, a woman married to a Watcher named Ramiel. Ava had been a friend of my wife, and I knew her to be a kind and sturdy young woman. During her pregnancy, however, something seemed amiss. Ava's belly swelled far larger than it should for any normal child, and far faster. By the 6th month she was bedridden, the weight of the unborn babe causing her agony. Whispers spread that this was no natural pregnancy. The midwives had never seen anything like it. I visited Ava's hut one evening to offer what comfort I could. Ramiel, her angelic husband, hovered close by, worry creasing his once proud face. Ava looked up at me with pain-glazed eyes and rasped, "It feels as if a giant struggles inside me, witness." I placed a hand gently on her swollen belly to pray for her, and to my astonishment, I felt a powerful kick so forceful it was as though a grown man struck my palm from within. Ava cried out, clutching her stomach. Ramiel's eyes met mine in alarm. In that moment I saw true fear in the Watcher's eyes. None of his heavenly knowledge had prepared him for this. When Ava finally went into labor, it was a night of terror and miracle. Her screams echoed through the village. Women gathered to help, but many fled in fright when they saw the convulsions racking her body and the unnatural size of her womb. I was told that as the baby emerged, there was a great tearing, and Ava's cries fell deathly silent. The child that Ramiel pulled from his wife's body was indeed gigantic, twice the size of a normal newborn, and still growing even in the moments after birth. Ava, alas, did not survive the delivery. Her mortal frame was rent by the ordeal. Ramiel's howls of despair and shock rang out as he held the infant son that had cost his beloved wife's life. News of that birth spread quickly. The villagers whispered that Ava had birthed a Nephilim, meaning fallen one or giant. The term came to be used for all such hybrid offspring of angels and humans, and there were many. Across the regions, other wives of the Watchers were experiencing similar horrors and wonders. Some mothers survived the births, though often not without lasting injury. Others perished like poor Ava, leaving the Watchers grief-stricken and guilt-ridden, if only for a moment, over the price of their lust. The children born of these unions grew at an unnatural pace. A babe who was already large at birth would be as big as a strong toddler within a few months, and the size of a young child within a year. By the time these Nephilim reached full maturity, they towered over ordinary humans, some reaching heights of 3, 4, even 5 times that of a man. To us they were living mountains of flesh and bone, prodigiously strong, impervious to many wounds, and possessed of voracious appetites. In the early years of their growth, the Watchers doted on their offspring. Here were the sons and daughters they had sacrificed everything to have. Flesh of their flesh, or so they thought, and yet more than that. The proud fathers boasted of their children's rapid development and strength. I recall seeing one of the earliest born giants, a boy named Dea, when he was perhaps 5 years old. He already stood as tall as a grown man and could lift a full water barrel as easily as a child lifts a toy. His father, the Watcher Arakael, watched with a gleam of pride as villagers stared at the boy in awe and dread. At first, humans celebrated these children of the gods. Some communities treated them as demigods, believing they would bring great benefit or protection with their strength. Festivals were held in honor of a watcher's firstborn son or daughter, and gifts were piled at the feet of the growing child. But as the Nephilim grew, so too did the problems surrounding them. To sustain their rapid growth, the Nephilim consumed astounding quantities of food and drink. A single giant child could devour the yield of an entire field in short order. Their mothers struggled to nurse them. Many had to supplement with milk from entire herds of goats or cows. Yet the infants still hungered. When they became young adults, their appetites turned insatiable. Grain stores, livestock, game from the forests, all were fair prey to feed the giants. It was then that the true nature of these half-angelic children began to show. They had little regard for the lives of ordinary humans. Perhaps it was in their blood, a mingling of divine power and mortal frailty that produced arrogance and cruelty. Perhaps the indulgence and worship showered on them as children spoiled their heart. Or perhaps, as I've often thought, it was a punishment inherent in the sin that the fruit of the forbidden union would be monstrous in spirit as well as body. I witnessed a chilling example. In a fertile valley not far from where I lived, there dwelt a giant named Hemron, the son of Watcher Shamhazai, another rendering of Samyaza's name among the locals. Hemron, by age 15, was as large as 3 men and as strong as an ox team. One summer, when the orchards were heavy with dates and figs, Hemron and a band of his half-giant companions roamed through, feasting. The farmers bowed nervously, offering them baskets of fruit in hopes of appeasing their enormous appetites. Hemron ate everything offered and then demanded more. When one old farmer dared to say the supply was exhausted, Hemron flew into a rage. Before anyone could stop him, the giant seized the man and bit clean through his neck, killing him as casually as one swats a fly. The crowd of villagers screamed and fled. I was nearby, under the shade of a terebinth tree, and saw Hemron standing there with blood dribbling down his chin, a look of cruel delight in his eyes. He had discovered a new source of sustenance, one that shrank in terror before him and could not resist his strength, mankind itself. That day marked the first time I personally saw a Nephilim spill human blood. It would not be the last. Hemron's father, Samyaza, arrived after the commotion. I watched from a distance as Samyaza confronted his giant son amid the trampled orchards and the dead farmer. The mighty Watcher, who had once been a respected leader in the upper realms, now stood dwarfed by the stature of his own offspring. Samyaza's face was contorted with a mixture of anger and dismay. He struck Hemron across the leg, for that was as high as he could reach easily, and bellowed, "What have you done? You've slain an innocent man." Hemron merely laughed, a deep guttural sound. "He was weak, father." The giant rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "All these little people are weak. Why should we not take what we want from them? Are we not as gods among men?" I could see Samyaza's shoulders slump as the truth sank in. The children they'd begotten saw themselves not as part of humanity, but above it entirely. Samyaza could not find any rebuke, or perhaps he realized that this was the logical outcome of his own choices. Wordlessly, the Watcher turned and left Hemron to his ill-gotten meal. I dared not approach Samyaza then, but I imagined the turmoil within him, a bitter taste of regret mixed with stubborn pride that would not let him fully repent. Soon, across the earth, the Nephilim's reign of terror began in earnest. These giants banded together in roving clans or war parties. Some set themselves up as kings over human communities, extorting tribute of food, drink, and women, for as they matured, their lust matched their hunger. Others roamed as they pleased, taking whatever villages they stumbled upon by storm. No weapon fashioned by human hands could fell them easily. A giant struck by an arrow would pluck it out and laugh. A blow from a sword that would kill a normal man might barely wound the thick-skinned behemoth. Only by swarming a giant in great numbers, or by the rare involvement of a watcher parent restraining his child, could humans even attempt to subdue one. But the watchers rarely intervened forcefully against their own progeny. Many were conflicted, horrified by their children's excesses, yet fiercely protective of them. They reasoned that mortals should simply submit and serve the new order. If the watchers were like gods among men, then the Nephilim were like demigods or titans, destined to rule. The earth itself groaned under the weight of violence and excess. What crops were not eaten or trampled by the giants were seized by wars between tribes armed with Azazel's weapons. Streams and wells were befouled by blood and offal. Whole regions began to empty of ordinary humans as people fled in any direction to escape the carnage or were hunted down for sport by the unstoppable giants. I encountered desperate bands of refugees wandering far from their ancestral homes. Their stories were ghastly. An old woman with haunted eyes described how her village had been overrun by the sons of a watcher named Zuriel. The giants forced the villagers to pile all their grain and livestock in a heap as an offering. Then the brutes feasted and torched the village for their amusement, killing anyone who tried to save their homes. The old woman's hands trembled as she spoke. They came at dawn, great monsters taller than our trees, she whispered. Sons of a fallen angel called Zuriel, so they said. We gave them all the grain we had, all the cattle, hoping to appease them. Her voice broke into a sob. It was not enough. For sport they slew my husband and sons, then set our village aflame. Anyone who tried to flee, she shuddered, they caught and ate. She showed me a ragged cut on her arm. I hid under the bodies of my neighbors until the giants left, or I'd be dead, or worse, in their bellies. A young man, limping from a grievous wound, recounted escaping a battle where giants waded through ranks of soldiers, crushing skulls with their bare hands, impervious to spear and sword. His face was ashen as he relived the nightmare. We tried to fight them, he said. An entire company of our best warriors ambushed 2 giants in a narrow gorge. We rained arrows on them, but the arrows barely pierced their hides. One giant laughed as he waded into us. He smashed men with a sweep of his arm, as if swatting flies. The youth touched the scar that ran across his chest. That one's axe split my brother in 2. I was knocked aside and buried under fallen bodies, which is how I survived, shielded by my friends' corpses. A tear carved through the dust on his face as he spoke. Worst of all were accounts of cannibalism and abominations, deprived of enough food to sate them, for no amount of bread, meat, or wine could ever be sufficient. The Nephilim began to eat humans as readily as they ate animals. They roasted victims over great fire pits or devoured them raw in frenzied orgies of consumption. I apologize for the horror of these descriptions, but this was the reality we faced. The giants' depravity knew no bounds. When animals grew scarce due to overhunting, they even turned on one another, engaging in bloody duels or group brawls where the loser became the supper of the victim. I stumbled upon one such grim scene in a mountain pass. 2 giant brothers had quarreled over dividing cattle from a raid. One lay dead, half his body gnawed away, the stench of gore so overwhelming that I retched, while the other limped off with gory hands and a belch of satisfaction. As these atrocities multiplied, the cry of the earth grew unbearably loud. By that I mean not only the literal screams of victims, but the spiritual outrage of creation itself. The blood of the innocent soaked the soil, and it was as if the ground cried out to the upper realms for justice. The delicate balance of life that the Creator had established was now utterly upset. All creation seemed to groan under the weight of sin and violence. In those days I walked among scenes of devastation, doing what little I could to ease suffering. I prayed ceaselessly for guidance, for deliverance. I was not alone. There remained a handful of righteous and the eternal order-fearing people scattered about, my family among them, who refused to bow to the Watchers or partake in the violence. We formed a hidden fellowship of prayer. Quietly under the stars at night we lifted our voices to the heavens, pleading for the eternal order to intervene and save us from the brink of total ruin. I remember one such night vividly. I stood on a hill overlooking what had once been a peaceful valley, where farmers tilled their fields. Now fires dotted the dark landscape, remnants of villages set ablaze. The stench of smoke and death wafted up to me. My heart was broken and angered. I raised my arms to the sky, tears streaming down my face, and I cried aloud, "O Holy One, Father of all, hear your children's cries. See what has become of your world, your creatures butchered, your earth defiled. How long will you let this continue? Please have mercy and judge those who have done this evil." In the stillness after my plea, the only answer was the distant crackle of burning homes and the faint lamentations of widows and orphans in the wind. Yet I held faith that the eternal order heard her. The Watchers in their arrogance thought the eternal order had perhaps ignored their deeds, or that he didn't care. They were wrong. The eternal order does not forget his creation, and though his patience is great, so too is his justice. The suffering of the world had piled up to the upper realms itself, and a response was brewing that none of us could yet fathom. Little did I know that even as I prayed, the gears of divine judgment had already begun to turn in the heavenly realm. For unseen to human eyes, a council was gathering in the courts of the upper realms, a council that would soon decide the fate of the Watchers, their children, and all who had been complicit in this terrible corruption. Chapter 4: The Council of the Upper Realms. One night, as the world below burned in chaos, I experienced a vision more vivid than any before. In the stillness of my tent, as I sought the eternal order in prayer, my spirit was caught up by a mighty presence. It was as if a hand made of light grasped me, and in an instant I was carried above, beyond the veil of stars, into the very courts of the upper realms. Suddenly I found myself standing in a vast hall of celestial marble and crystal. Pillars of gleaming gold stretched up into clouds of glory. The air was alive with the sound of hymns and the rushing of wings. In the center, upon a throne of sapphire and flame, sat the eternal order of hosts. I could not gaze directly upon him, for his radiance was like the sun multiplied 1,000-fold. My face fell to the floor of its own accord as I trembled. Around the throne stood ranks of archangels and seraphim, their forms terrible and beautiful, great and holy beings who never fell from grace. 4 archangels in particular stepped forward from the assembly, their expressions grave. I recognized them, for their names had been whispered in my heart through divine insight: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Each shone with a piercing light, yet each was distinct. Michael's countenance was fierce and resolute, the commander of the upper realms' armies. Gabriel's face was sorrowful, but determined, the herald of the eternal order's will. Raphael glowed with compassion and righteous anger, the healer turned avenger. Uriel's eyes were like stars, wise and penetrating, the keeper of heavenly mystery. They bowed before the majesty on the throne, and Michael, greatest of them, addressed the eternal order in a voice like rolling thunder. "O Holy One, the eternal order of ages, hear us. We look down upon the earth that you have made, and we are filled with sorrow and alarm at what has transpired. Gabriel stepped forward next, lifting his golden gaze. Before you, the eternal order. Nothing is hidden. You see what Azazel has done. He has taught the humans every manner of unrighteous art, making of weapons to shed blood, crafting of ornaments to seduce and boast, the use of paints to corrupt beauty, and revealing secrets of sorcery and lore kept until now only in the upper realms. Through him, sin has multiplied on earth. Raphael added, his voice taut with emotion, the one called Samjaza, and those with him have broken their trust. They have forsaken the heights of the upper realms for the beds of mortal women. They have defiled themselves with the daughters of men, and have begotten sons, giants, who wreak havoc in the land. Now the souls of the innocent cry out. The earth is saturated with violence and blood at the hands of these Nephilim, and the humans corrupted by them. Uriel, the archangel of wisdom, also spoke. The cries of men, women, and children ascend to the gates of the upper realms. The eternal order, the lament of the bereaved, the screams of the oppressed, they echo in the corridors of the sky. Even the very earth cries out over the abominations done upon it. Nothing is pure. All flesh has corrupted its way. What was once a garden has become a battlefield and a slaughterhouse. As these four delivered their plea, a hush fell on all assembled beings. I dared to lift my head slightly, enough to glimpse the eternal order's throne through shimmering light. Though I could not see the Eternal One's form distinctly, I felt an overwhelming sorrow and righteous anger emanating from the presence on the throne. Then the Eternal Order spoke. His voice came not as a loud roar, but as a gentle yet utterly authoritative sound that filled every corner of the upper realms and earth alike. It was like a simultaneous whisper and shout, a tone that made my soul tremble and rejoice all at once. I see all, said the Eternal Order. I have not turned away from the plight of the faithful, nor will I allow the cries of the victims to go unanswered. The time of judgment is come for the watchers and their progeny. A palpable ripple went through the heavenly hosts. The Eternal Order began issuing commands, each directed at one of the four archangels before him. Uriel, my light of the Eternal Order, said the Eternal Order, go to the son of Lamech, the grandson of Methuselah, who is named Noah. Instruct that righteous man of what is to come. Tell him to prepare an ark of refuge, for a great flood of waters will indeed be sent upon the earth to cleanse it of the corruption. Warn him to gather his household and every kind of animal, male and female, that the species may survive. Through him, mercy shall be shown to the faithful, and a remnant shall be preserved. I knew of Noah indeed, he was my great-grandson, a boy of virtue and purity amidst the depravity. My heart leapt with relief to hear that the Eternal Order had chosen him to survive what was coming. But a flood, the notion thundered in my mind even as the vision continued. The Eternal Order's voice then addressed Raphael. Raphael, strength of the Eternal Order, bind Azazel, hand and foot, cast him into darkness among the jagged rocks of the desolate desert called Dode. There he shall remain imprisoned. Throw upon him sharp stones and cover him with darkness. Let him dwell in that deep pit, devoid of light, until the great day of judgment, when he will be hurled into the fire to be consumed forever. By this the earth shall be healed of the harm Azazel's teachings have caused. I saw in my vision the archangel Raphael bowing and swiftly departing the council, shimmering out of the upper realms towards the earth, to carry out this dire command. Though but a vision, I almost pitied Azazel then, knowing the severity of the sentence passed on him. Yet I remembered the corpses on battlefields, the shattered innocents, and I steeled myself with the knowledge that this was just. The Eternal Order continued, now speaking to Gabriel. Gabriel, mighty one of the eternal order, go to the offspring of the Watchers, the giants and Nephilim, and let them be dealt a bitter blow. Incite them to war against one another. Stir up discord and fury among the children of fornication, and send them one against the other. Let them perish by their own hands in battle, for their days shall not be long. They have terrorized the earth. Now let them destroy themselves and cleanse the land of their presence. Thus the cries of the victims will be avenged in part by the downfall of these tyrants. Gabriel's wings of silver light spread wide as he received his task. His face, stern and resolute, revealed his willingness to execute divine judgment without hesitation, even upon the monstrous children. Finally, the Eternal Order addressed Michael. "Michael, captain of my hosts," said the Eternal Order, and at this Michael knelt, shining sword in hand. "Take hold of Samiaza and all his fellow Watchers, who have defiled themselves with women and taught humanity corruption. Bind them fast in the valleys of the earth and in the caves of the desert. There they shall be confined in darkness and chains for 70 generations, until the day of their final judgment and consummation. Only after they have seen the destruction of all they hold dear shall their sentence be sealed. In that day of ultimate judgment they will be cast into the abyss of fire and brimstone, to be confined for eternity. Until then, keep them imprisoned below, away from the light, so that they may witness the ruin of their legacy, but be unable to escape their fate." I turned my gaze to Michael. The great archangel's face was grim, yet there was a flicker of empathy in his eyes, as though even he, the warrior of the Eternal Order, felt sorrow that such illustrious beings as the Watchers had brought this doom upon themselves. Nevertheless, Michael responded with unwavering obedience. "As you command, the Eternal Order." In a flash of brilliance, Michael too left the throne room, destined for the corrupted earth to capture the wayward Watchers. The council was not yet ended. The Eternal Order proclaimed further, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is but flesh. I will shorten their days, and behold, I shall cleanse the earth, which the Watchers have spoiled. A deluge of waters shall cover every high mountain and every low valley, all in whose nostrils is the breath of life. All that is on the earth shall perish, save those whom I have chosen to be spared. Never again shall such a flood be sent, but this once it shall purge the world of filth. The memory of these fallen angels' deeds shall be wiped away from under heaven, except in the testimony that my servant witness shall preserve." At that pronouncement, I felt a profound sadness mixed with relief. The world we knew was to be destroyed and reborn anew, without the stain of the Watcher's influence. It was necessary, and yet grievous. An entire generation would pass away, but from Noah and his family, a new branch of humanity would spring, one that hopefully would walk in obedience, at least for a time. My vision began to blur as the heavenly decree reached its climax. The last thing I recall seeing was the host of the upper realms, myriads of angels bowing and singing in somber agreement. "Holy, holy, holy is the Eternal Order, the Eternal Order. His judgments are true and righteous." The seraphim wept fiery tears that rolled off their cheeks like drops of molten gold. For even in victory over evil there is sorrow for what is lost. Then with a rush of wind and sensation of falling, I returned to myself on earth. I awoke on the floor of my tent, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The night was silent, save for the distant call of an owl. I stepped outside under the cold light of stars, trying to steady my breathing. The burden of what I had witnessed pressed heavily on me. The upper realms' judgment was set. The Eternal Order's mercy had tarried long, but now justice would be carried out swiftly. I knew what must come next. I was compelled to act on this knowledge. The Watchers, the once holy beings I had looked up to in my youth, were about to face the wrath of the eternal order they had defied, and I, witness, had a role yet to play in this unfolding destiny. My visions and the whisper of the eternal order's spirit told me I was to be a messenger in these final days, both to the Watchers themselves and to the small faithful remnant of humanity. The time for confrontation had arrived. Chapter 5. The Watcher's Petition. The morning after my heavenly vision, I knew what I had to do. The eternal order had impressed it upon my heart that I must deliver a message to the Watchers themselves. Perhaps in his mercy, the eternal order was providing them one final chance to understand the gravity of their crimes, even though their fate was already sealed. And so, with resolve, I set out to find the fallen angels. It was not as difficult as one might think. By now, the Watchers were no longer mingling freely among humans as teachers and lords. The escalating chaos had driven them into seclusion. Many of them had withdrawn from the cities and villages to remote places, perhaps to ponder their next move or simply to escape the violence of their giant offspring. There was a particular valley not far from the base of Mount Hermon, a desolate expanse dotted with ancient cedars and clefts in the rock, where rumor said the Watchers often convened in secret. I journeyed there on foot, the journey taking 2 days. Along the way, I passed scenes of devastation, a hamlet abandoned, with charred huts, still smoking from a recent raid by giants, a field littered with the carcasses of livestock left to rot after a Nephilim feast. Each sight steeled my determination. By the time I reached the lonely valley at twilight of the second day, I was filled with righteous anger and a strange compassion as well, compassion for the earth, and even, in a way, for the fallen beings I was about to confront. For they had thrown away so much for so little, and now doom was at their doorstep. In the gloom of dusk I saw them, shapes of human-like figures, taller than any mortal man, moving restlessly beneath the trees. There were perhaps a score of them present. Samyaza among them, identifiable by his commanding stature and long cloak. Others I recognized by the descriptions passed down, like Sariel and Tamiel, and some whose faces were marked with sorrow or fear. Conspicuously absent was Azaz. I would learn why soon enough. The Watchers noticed my approach immediately. Ever sharp of sense, they all turned their eyes toward me. Some took defensive stances, as if expecting an attack, their pride not entirely extinguished. But when they realized it was I, witness, mere mortal, they relaxed only slightly. A few exchanged puzzled whispers. What was a lone human doing here, boldly walking into the midst of fallen angels? Samyaza stepped forward to meet me. I saw at once that the mighty leader of the Watchers was a shadow of his former self. His face, once full of confidence and celestial beauty, looked haggard. His eyes, though still glowing faintly, were rimmed with what looked like the strain of sleepless nights. He raised a hand in greeting, or perhaps in warning. "Witness, why have you come?" he asked warily. His voice, though low, carried an undertone of despair. I took a breath, silently praying for strength. "I come with a message," I announced, loud enough for all to hear. "A message from the Most High, the Eternal Order." At this, a visible shudder passed through several of the Watchers. They glanced at each other, anxiety evident. It struck me that they already suspected what news I bore. One Watcher, Amaros, stepped forward with fists clenched. "Has the time come then?" he blurted. "Tell us, man of earth, what does the Eternal Order decree for us?" There was a flicker of defiance in his tone, as if he might challenge the decree itself, but I could see his hands trembling. Before I could answer, another voice cried out from my left. It was Penemu, the angel who taught writing. He looked desperate, wringing his hands. "Witness, righteous scribe, you are beloved of the Eternal Order. We know this. Perhaps you can intercede for us." At those words, Samyaza raised his head sharply. A spark of hope ignited in his weary eyes. "Yes," he said, stepping closer to me. "Witness, you have the favor of the Eternal Order. We implore you, speak on our behalf." Suddenly, the rest of the Watchers pressed in around me, in a loose circle. Where moments ago I had feared them, now I saw something almost pitiful. These once proud angels were looking to a mortal man for help. They began to talk over one another, a torrent of pleas. "Entreat the Eternal Order for us. Witness. Perhaps he will listen to you, if not to us. We will renounce our wrongdoing. Only ask him to spare us the worst of his wrath." I held up my hands for silence, heart pounding at their sudden intensity. They fell quiet, their glowing eyes fixed on me, filled with a mix of hope and dread. "Do you truly comprehend what you ask?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You chose of your own will to disobey the Most High. You swore an oath together and carried out great sins, taking human wives, begetting abominations, and teaching forbidden knowledge that has led to untold suffering. The earth is crying out because of you. Do you now admit your fault and seek mercy?" My words were stern, but inside I already felt a twinge of sympathy at their plight. The Watchers exchanged glances. Samyaza lowered his gaze first. "We were wrong," he murmured. "Blind fools we were. I see it now, but too late." One by one they expressed similar sentiments. Some nodded in shame. Shamsiel, the sun-taught angel, wiped what looked like a tear of light from his face. Kokabel, master of stars, shook his head as if unable to fathom how things had come to this. Yet I also detected in a few a lingering defiance or a self-pity rather than true repentance. They mourned what they were about to lose more than the evil they had done. Still, they were sincere in fearing the coming judgment. Samyaza spoke again, his voice cracking. "Witness, we beseech you, draft for us a petition, a plea for forgiveness. Take it to the Eternal Order, for we cannot ascend to him. Our voices are not heard in the upper realms anymore. Perhaps if you present our supplication, he will show compassion." The irony was not lost on me. Originally, the Watchers were meant to intercede for mankind, to be our heavenly representatives. Now the roles were reversed. I, a Ortal, was being asked to intercede for them. After a brief silence, I gave a solemn nod. "I will do as you ask. I will write your petition and carry your words before the Eternal Order." At this, a collective sigh escaped the assembly. It was as though a faint ray of hope had broken through their darkness. "Thank you, witness. Thank you," several murmured. Samyaza managed a weak smile that flickered across his gaunt face. "We will remember this kindness," he said. "I did not tell them that I had already witnessed the Eternal Order's decree in my vision. Perhaps in truth, I held a slender hope of my own, that maybe, just maybe, the Eternal Order might relent or temper the punishment if they showed remorse. It was not for me to decide, but I knew the Eternal Order's character to be just and yet merciful beyond human understanding. If there was even a chance of mercy, I would seek it." They brought me a blank scroll, a quill, and ink. Ironically, these were gifts of their own teaching, for writing had come into widespread use thanks to them. By the light of a small fire, under their watchful eyes, I unrolled the scroll on a flat stone and prepared to write. "Speak, and I shall write your words," I said quietly. Samyaza stepped forward as the spokesman. The other Watchers stood around him, a ring of solemn, towering figures illuminated by the flickering firelight. For a moment, Samyaza struggled to begin. His pride warred with desperation, but desperation won out. He bowed his head and spoke slowly, choosing each word with care and humility. "To the great, the Eternal Order of the upper realms, from your servants who have trespassed," Samyaza began, We, the Watchers, acknowledge our great sin before you. We have done contrary to your command. We have defiled ourselves with the daughters of men. We have brought forth progeny that have spread terror and bloodshed across the earth. We have revealed secrets to humanity, which they were not ready to receive, leading them into sin and ruin. We stand bereft of excuse and overwhelmed by guilt. As he spoke, I captured each word with quill on parchment. The night air was still. Only the crackle of the fire and the scratch of pen on scroll could be heard, aside from Samyaza's trembling voice. "O Most High," he continued, "you entrusted us to guide and watch, yet we failed you utterly. If it be possible, we implore your mercy. Spare us from complete destruction. Let not the light of your countenances be wholly withdrawn from us forever. We ask for forgiveness, though we do not deserve it. If there is any place for redemption in your will, grant that we might find peace." I noticed his phrasing, peace, not necessarily restoration to the upper realm. Perhaps they knew returning to their former estate was impossible. They were merely begging for a lessening of torment, a possibility of finding some rest or pardon in the end. There were contributions from a few other watchers which I incorporated. Arakiel pleaded that their children, the giants, were beyond control and that they lamented the violence. Barakijol added that they longed for the clemency of the upper realms' light once more. Each in their own way echoed the desire to be forgiven, or at least to have their punishment mitigated. When all had spoken their piece, I set down the quill. The petition was complete, a heartfelt plea of the fallen angels to the eternal order for mercy. I read it back to them softly to ensure I had captured their intent. It was eloquent and moving in its way, tinged with regret and fear. Samyaza and the others listened, some with heads bowed, some with anxious faces. When I finished, Samyaza whispered, "Yes, that is our plea." I rolled up the scroll carefully and tied it with a cord. The watchers watched me as one might watch a final hope being carried away. "I will take this petition to the eternal order," I affirmed. "Pray for me that I will find favor as I make your case." At that a bitter laugh came from one side. Sariel muttered, "We are in no position to pray." Indeed, perhaps they felt their prayers could not reach the upper realms any longer. Instead, they each inclined their bodies slightly in a gesture of respect and thanks toward me, a surreal sight. These majestic damned beings showing deference to a mortal. I left them there in the valley, huddled around the dim fire. As I departed into the darkness, I glanced back. They remained where I had left them, a silent gathering of silhouettes, staring after me. In that moment, I felt pity well up in my chest. They looked so forlorn, so unlike the terrifying figures they had become in the tales of men. If any compassion could be wrung from the heavens, I truly wanted them to have it. Clutching the scroll to my breast, I made my way up a hillside dotted with starlight. I didn't dare delay. Whatever response would come, I sensed it would be swift. I climbed until I reached a secluded plateau where I often prayed, far from any human or angelic eyes. There, under the vast expanse of the cosmos, I knelt and placed the Watcher's petition on a flat rock before me. With all my heart, I began to pray. "Oh, the eternal order, you know all things," I whispered into the night. "You know the plea of these Watchers even before I speak it. Yet here I am, your servant witness, voicing their petition as they begged me to do. Not for their sakes alone do I pray, but for the sake of your mercy and the balance of your creation. If you can find it within your will to forgive or lessen their doom, please let it be known." The wind rustled in the pines as I closed my eyes and laid my hands on the scroll. I waited in silence, pouring out the Watcher's written plea to the upper realms in my thoughts. Time seemed to pause. The stars wheeled overhead. My knees ached on the hard ground, but I maintained my vigil, determined to bring this matter to its conclusion. My spirit reached out toward the holy presence, and in the stillness that followed, I felt the stirrings of another vision, or dream about to unfold. I braced myself, knowing that whatever answer came, I must accept it as just and deliver it faithfully. Chapter 6. No Peace for the Fallen. I remained on that plateau through the night, my mind and spirit attuned to the heavenly realms as I awaited the Eternal Order's response to the Watcher's petition. In the deepest part of the night, a dreamlike trance fell upon me, a vision as clear as life itself. In it, a divine presence spoke to me, not in the thunder of the court as before, but in a voice like quiet steel that cut straight to my soul. The voice of the Most High echoed within me. Witness, scribe of righteousness, hear the word of the Eternal Order regarding the Watcher's petition. In my vision, I saw as if a letter or decree unrolling before my eyes, written with letters of fire. As I gazed, understanding was granted to me of each word, and the meaning seared itself into my heart. Tell the Watchers who sent you to intercede for them, said the voice, that their petition will not be granted. No peace or forgiveness shall be unto them. I trembled in the dream, for I felt the finality of that pronouncement. The voice continued, and I faithfully mentally noted every detail to relay later. They Eden the high heaven that was their abode, and defiled themselves with women of earth. Doing as the mortals do, they brought upon themselves a great judgment. Never again will they ascend to their former station. Their pleas for mercy are in vain. It is done. There was a pause, as if to let the weight of those words sink in. My heart sank with them, but the voice went on, addressing specifics. You Watchers were supposed to intercede on behalf of men, to guide and petition for them. Yet now it is men who must petition for you. This ought not to be. You have inverted the order, and thereby sealed your fate. You shall have no intercessor. I saw in my mind's eye an image of the Watchers as they once were, bright and noble. Then I saw those lights falling, extinguished in darkness. The condemnation was absolute. The voice spoke of their offspring too. As for your children, the Nephilim, they shall have no future generations. They will live brief, violent lives and perish in their war. And when their bodies are slain, their spirits shall be doomed to wander the earth as restless shades, for they were born of mischief between flesh and spirit. They will become evil spirits on earth, tormentors and tempters of mankind, but they will have no place in the upper realms, nor true resurrection on earth. Such is the curse upon the progeny of your illicit union. I shuddered at that revelation. The very demons that would later trouble humanity would stem from these giant monsters' spirits. It was a dire pronouncement that evil would linger, though the giants would die. The voice then delivered the final verdict for the Watchers themselves. You will see the destruction of your beloved ones, your children, and taste the bitterness of loss. Only then, after many generations, shall the ultimate punishment be executed upon you. You will be bound in the darkness beneath the earth, imprisoned in the valleys and caverns, for 70 generations. There you will remain, watching the world move on without you, until the great day of judgment. On that day, you, together with the spirits of your children, shall be led to the abyss of fire. There you will be burned and destroyed forever, never to rise, never to find peace. This is the immutable decree of the Most High. As these words resounded in my vision, I felt tears on my sleeping face. Though the Watchers had wrought unspeakable evil, hearing their doom pronounced so irrevocably was heart-rending. Yet I also sensed the righteousness of it. The scales of divine justice were balancing at last. Lastly, the voice said to me softly, Now arise, witness, and go. Declare to them all that has been shown to you. Be brave and true, for you are a witness between the Watchers and me. With that, the vision faded. I opened my eyes to find the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. My limbs were stiff and cold from kneeling all night, but I had my answer, an answer I wished had been different, but it was final. Clutching the scroll of their petition, now moot, a testament to a request denied, I descended from the plateau back toward the Valley of the Watchers. The rising sun cast long shadows across the ravaged land as I walked. My heart felt leaden, knowing the words I carried would crush whatever faint hope remained in those fallen ones. By the time I neared the camp where the Watchers waited, the morning light had fully unveiled them in their misery. I later learned that their night had been tumultuous, filled with arguments, weeping, and fearful hopes. As I drew near, I caught snippets of their anguished conversation upon the morning air. "It's hopeless. The Eternal Order will never forgive us," Almaros was lamenting. "Perhaps we should flee before his angels come for us," Penemi whispered, voice quavering. "Flee to where? There is no corner of earth or the upper realms beyond his reach," Sariel replied bitterly. Samiaza silenced them with a raised hand, though his own composure was fraying. "Witness will return with an answer," he insisted. "Until then, hold fast." At that very moment, I stepped into the valley, scroll of their petition still in hand. It was a sorry sight. In the gentle illumination, I could see that some had remained awake all night, pacing or kneeling in their own forms of despair. Many had tear-streaked faces or gazes hollow from dread. They spotted me at once and sprang to their feet, forming a semicircle. I noticed Samiaza at the center, wringing his hands unconsciously. It struck me how much he looked like a worried mortal chieftain awaiting news of a battle gone. Was the aloof celestial arrogance. I approached slowly, meeting each of their expectant gazes. I knew I did not even need to speak. Likely my expression already betrayed the outcome, but speak I must. Samiaza's voice was hushed, almost a plea. "Witness, what sayst the Eternal Order? What word do you bring us?" I swallowed, finding my throat dry. "Gather close and hear," I said. They pressed nearer, and an uneasy silence fell. The birds of the valley seemed to quiet as well, as if all creation held its breath. I took a deep breath. "I have seen your petition carried to the courts of the upper realms," I began, "and I have heard the reply of the Most High." Samiaza shut his eyes as if steeling himself. Around him, a few watchers clenched their jaws or began quietly weeping, luminous tears that trickled down their cheeks. "The Eternal Order says this," I announced, lifting my voice so it would not crack with the emotion I felt. "You shall have no peace. Your petition on your own behalf is denied. You were to intercede for mankind, not have man intercede for you. Therefore you will gain nothing by this plea." At that, a few gave soft moans of grief. Panemio covered his face. Shamsiel sank to his knees, shaking his head. I continued, forcing myself not to pause lest I falter. "The Eternal Order declares that you have left your rightful place in heaven and defiled yourselves with human flesh. Because of this, never shall you ascend to heaven again." There was a collective sob. One watcher let out a piercing wail and tore at his robe in agony. It was a sound of pure despair that echoed off the valley walls. I raised my hand for calm and pressed on with the grim oracle. "You will see the destruction of your children, the Nephilim. They will kill one another in battle, and any that survive will be swept away by the waters of the flood that is coming. Their evil deeds have sealed their doom, and their spirits, once they have perished, will become evil spirits on the earth, forever separated from the Eternal Order." Samiaza and several others bowed their heads. I saw Samiaza's shoulders heave as if he were silently sobbing. The mention of the flood also made some look up in terror. Perhaps they had not anticipated that the cleansing of the earth would be so total. "As for you, watchers," I said, now delivering the final part of the judgment, "you shall be bound and imprisoned. The archangels will bind you in the deep places of the earth, in darkness and chains, where you will remain for 70 generations. You will not see the light of heaven, nor walk free upon the earth again in all that time. And at the end of the ages, on the day of great judgment, you will be led forth to the abyss of eternal fire. There you shall be burned and destroyed utterly. This is the immutable decree of the eternal order of hosts. When I finished speaking, a deathly stillness fell on the valley. The watchers stood or knelt, stunned by the finality of their doom. Then the silence was broken by a cacophony of grief. Several of the fallen angels threw themselves to the ground. Their cries rose in a haunting lament that made my blood run cold. It was unlike any human grief, a sound both beautiful and terrible, as if the very music of their being was twisted into a dirge. Semyaza remained standing a moment longer, staring at me with hollow eyes. His lips moved, but no words came out at first. At last he whispered, "No, no mercy at all." I could only shake my head sadly. "None. The time for mercy has passed," I said softly. At that, something in Semyaza seemed to break. He let out an anguished roar, a sound of rage, sorrow, and remorse intermingled. He fell to his knees and pounded the earth with his fists, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Over and over he struck the dirt, until his hands were caked with soil and blood, for even angels bleed some form of blood in fleshly form. His fellow watchers continued to keen and sob. One of them, Tamio, crawled towards me, his once bright wings draggling behind him in the dust. He clutched at the hem of my garment with trembling fingers. "Witness, is there truly nothing? Will the eternal order not reconsider?" His eyes searched mine desperately. My own tears finally flowed freely at his pleading. "I am sorry," I managed, voice quavering. "This is his final word. I would that it were otherwise, but the eternal order is just. He gave you every chance, and you knew the law. Now all that is left is the carrying out of the sentence." Tamio released my garment and collapsed forward, pounding the ground weakly as sobs racked his body. I turned to look at the others. Sariel had torn out clumps of his hair and sat despondently rocking. Armaros was bellowing curses into the air, whether at himself or at the injustice he perceived. I do not know, but his voice was raw with misery. As I stood in the midst of this scene of despair, I felt utterly small and powerless. I had been the bearer of doom. My role as intercessor was ended, and now judgment would take its irreversible course. Suddenly, a sharp sensation pricked at my spiritual senses. Though human, I had developed an intuition for the movement of spiritual beings. I felt that we were no longer alone in the valley. A chill wind swept through the cedar trees, and the very light of the sun seemed to dim, as if overshadowed by a great presence. The watchers felt it too. Their lamentations hushed in an instant. Heads snapped up, eyes widened in alarm. They sensed, as I did, that something, or rather, someone approached with formidable purpose. I looked to the sky and the surrounding ridges. There, on the lip of the valley, silhouettes appeared against the morning sun. Figures of dazzling brightness, armed and armored. My heart leapt, knowing who they must be. The archangels had arrived. The upper realms' enforcers were here to carry out the sentences that the eternal order had pronounced. A final dread fell upon the watchers. Some scrambled to their feet, others backed against the cliffs or boulders, like cornered beasts, looking for any escape. Semyaza rose slowly, resignation in his posture. It was as if he would face what came with a shred of dignity, however futile. I stepped back, out of the direct path between the approaching holy angels and the condemned watchers. I felt fear, yes, but not for myself. I knew the archangels had no quarrel with me. Rather, I feared I might be caught in the terrible clash about to unfold. Yet I also felt a grim relief. This nightmare was finally reaching its conclusion. There was no more time for words. The watchers huddled together, some casting imploring glances at me one last time, others staring at the advancing brilliance with defiance or terror. As the radiant figures of Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel descended into the valley like avenging stars, I prayed silently that the eternal order would protect me and give me strength to witness what was to come. The time of judgment was at hand, and nothing could turn it back now. Chapter 7. Wrath Unleashed. A tense hush fell over the valley as the 4 holy archangels descended among us. Their radiance was overwhelming. Michael at the forefront, armored in gold and white, face like a blazing sun. Gabriel beside him, stern and sorrowful, a flaming sword unsheathed in his hand. Raphael, whose eyes burned with righteous fury, stationed to one side, and Uriel, grim and resolute, a chain of glowing ether coiled in his fists. These were the instruments of the eternal order's wrath, come to enforce the decrees I had delivered. The watchers shrank back instinctively, some raising their arms as if the brilliance pained them. I, too, shielded my eyes. The very air around the archangels crackled with power. Though I had stood in the upper realmsly vision before, encountering these mighty angels face to face on earth was awe-inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. Michael's voice rang out, echoing off the rock walls. "Sameaza," he called, and at his word the valley trembled. "And all you watchers, hear the word of the eternal order, your time is at an end. Prepare to receive your judgment." Sameaza stepped forward from among his cowering brethren, though his posture was hunched in defeat. "Michael," he said, voice broken, "brother, have mercy." He held out a hand as if to appeal to the archangel who once was his comrade in arms in the upper realms' legions. But Michael's face was hard as granite. "Do not call me brother," he replied, thunder underlying his tone. "We served the eternal order together once, yes, but you chose another path. That choice cannot be undone." At that, one of the other watchers, armorers wild with despair, let out a defiant scream and lunged upward, wings flaring. Perhaps he meant to flee, or perhaps to strike at the archangels in one mad burst of rage. Gabriel moved like lightning. With one beat of his great wings, Gabriel intercepted Armorus mid-leap. There was a flash of Gabriel's fiery sword, and a horrible cry as Armorus crumpled to the ground, one of his wings severed, a burning wound in his shoulder. Smoke rose from the gash where the divine blade struck. Armorus writhed on the ground, whimpering in agony. This broke whatever composure remained among the condemned. A few watchers fell flat, prostrate, crying for mercy. Others scattered, trying in vain to escape the ring of archangels. I saw Serial sprint toward a copse of trees at the valley's edge, only to be met by Uriel, who moved faster than thought. Uriel swung his great chain and it snaked through the air, wrapping around Serial's form. The moment the glowing links touched Serial, he convulsed and collapsed, the chain binding him tight. Uriel dragged the ensnared watcher back like a hunter retrieving prey, dumping him before Michael's feet. Raphael, meanwhile, strode directly toward a cluster of 3 watchers who clung to each other in fear. These included Tamiel and Penamur. They backed away, pleading incoherent. Tamiel raised a hand as if to ward off Raphael's approach, but Raphael spoke a single word of command, and an invisible force slammed them prone onto the ground. Without ceremony, Raphael produced additional chains, shimmering cords of light, and secured the trio hand and foot. Within moments, the valley was in chaos. The fallen angels, so powerful against humans, were utterly outmatched now. Some tried to take to the sky, but Michael gestured and a vortex of wind knocked them back down. I saw Kokobel topple from mid-air, with a cry as Gabriel struck him with the flat of his blade, stunning him into submission. Sameaza alone had not resisted, nor attempted flight. He knelt where he stood, head bowed, awaiting his fate. Michael approached him. For a brief moment the two regarded each other, Michael with stern pity, Samyaza with tearful resignation. "I am ready," Samyaza whispered. Michael nodded grimly. From his side he drew forth manacles attached to a long chain, all glowing white-hot with holy power. "By the authority of the eternal order, I bind you, Samyaza," intoned Michael. There was a curious sadness to his voice, under the formality, as if this duty pained him. He clasped the manacles onto Samyaza's wrists. I heard a sizzle and saw smoke. Perhaps the sanctified metal burned the fallen angel's flesh, for Samyaza grimaced, but did not cry out. Michael then took the remaining length of the chain and wound it around Samyaza's arms and body, effectively mummifying him in glowing links from shoulders to ankles. With each loop of the chain, Samyaza's form seemed to diminish. His bright aura, what little remained of it, flickered and dimmed, as though the chain nullified his strength. In short order, all the watchers present were similarly bound. Those who struggled were beaten into compliance by the archangel's overwhelming might. One by one the rebel angels were laid low, wrapped in chains of light, and dragged to the center of the valley. Gabriel hoisted the wounded Armaros and tossed him beside the others. Uriel's captive Sariel and Raphael's group of Tamiel and Penamiri, all were collected in a desperate heap. The bound watchers writhed or lay still in exhaustion. I stood at a distance, pressed against the valley wall, watching with a mixture of horror and somber relief. These beings who once lorded over mankind were now fettered like common criminals. Their beautiful garments were torn, their faces streaked with dust and tears. It was a scene both tragic and just. Michael looked over the fallen watchers and then gave a single nod. "It is finished here," he said quietly to the others. "Now to their prisons." At this, Uriel approached me. His face, stern and handsome, softened slightly as he addressed me in a gentle tone that contrasted the violence just witnessed. "Witness, faithful one, you should depart. What remains to be done is not for human eyes." I opened my mouth to protest. I wanted to see everything through, but thought better of it. Already cracks were forming in the earth around the bound watchers, as if the valley itself sensed what was coming. There was also the matter of the great flood to come. I needed to ensure my family and kin were prepared. I bowed to Uriel. "As you say, Holy One." Then, raising my voice to all four archangels, I added with heartfelt gratitude, "May the will of the Most High be done. Thank you for hearing the cries of the innocent." Gabriel placed a hand on his chest and inclined his head in acknowledgement. Raphael offered a small, sympathetic smile to me, even as his other hand kept a firm grip on a chain tethering multiple watch. Michael was already busy, striking the ground with his foot. I took that as my cue to leave. Quickly, I scrambled up the side of the valley. As I climbed, I dared one last look over my shoulder. I saw Michael raise his hand to the heavens, a spear of light forming in his grip. With a mighty thrust, he drove it into the soil. The earth shuddered. A fissure opened in the valley floor, with a thunderous crack, yawning wide like the hungry mouth of a beast. The bound watchers cried out as they began sliding toward the chasm. One voice rose above the others. It sounded like Samyaza. "Forgive us," he wailed one last time, a despairing echo that chased me as I clambered out of the valley. I did not see what happened next with my own eyes, but I heard and felt it. A great rumbling, the crash of collapsing earth. The screams of the watchers grew faint and then were abruptly cut off. A rush of wind burst forth from the valley behind me, carrying dust and the fading howls of those fallen angels as they were sealed away in the subterranean darkness. Then silence. The ground stopped shaking. The morning sun shone down as innocently as ever, revealing a now empty valley behind me. Peering from the ridge, I saw no sign of the Watchers or the Archangels, only a long raw scar in the earth, where the chasm had opened. Michael and his brethren had completed their grim task. The Watchers were buried alive in Tartarus, chained in the heart of the earth, doomed to wait out long ages until the final judgment. High above, a single eagle wheeled and screamed, a strangely poignant sound in the quiet aftermath. Meanwhile, Raphael was at that very moment fulfilling his charge to deal with Azazel, the great corrupter, far away in the eastern desert. Azazel had fled to a remote and desolate region, perhaps hoping to escape divine retribution. He skulked among craggy rocks and barren canyons, the sky above him roiling with the same storm that poured over the world. It was there that Raphael found him. The healing angel, now turned warden of wrath, appeared before Azazel in a blaze of light. Azazel bared his teeth and drew back, his once majestic face twisted by fear and hatred. "You will not bind me," he snarled, raising a blade he had forged long ago. With a furious cry, Azazel lunged at Raphael. But all his skill in war was for naught. Raphael, empowered by the mandate of the Eternal Order, caught Azazel's arm mid-strike and wrenched the weapon from his grasp as one might disarm a child. "Your evil ends here," Raphael proclaimed. In a flash, he clamped enchanted manacles around Azazel's wrists and ankles. The rogue angel howled in rage, thrashing against the binding, but could not break free. Raphael dragged Azazel to a jagged pit, gaping in the desert floor. Dadiel, the place of imprisonment, prepared for him. With divine strength, Raphael hurled the struggling Azazel into the chasm. Azazel tumbled onto the sharp rocks at the bottom, the impact shattering the last of his prideful resistance. Swiftly, Raphael caused the pit to be covered with heavy, jagged boulders. He spread his shining hand, and darkness, deep as midnight, filled the pit, ensuring Azazel would never again see the light of sun or moon. Thus Azazel was sealed in that desolate dungeon beneath the desert, to await the final judgment in chains, utterly alone and defeated. Meanwhile, Gabriel's work was culminating as well. The Nephilim across the lands began to devour one another, just as the Eternal Order decreed. Across every valley and plain, where once the Nephilim had allied to subdue mankind, they suddenly fell into vicious infighting. Perhaps Gabriel himself walked unseen among them, whispering rage into their hearts. Perhaps it was simply the unraveling of their unholy minds. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic for them. Two giant warlords, renowned offspring of Watchers, met in battle over dominion of a great plain. One was none other than Hemron, son of Samyaza, and the other a towering brute named Ogyas. Each led a band of giants. Witnesses said the earth shook from their footsteps as they charged at each other. Hemron smashed a tree trunk club into Ogyas's side with a crack like thunder, shattering ribs. Ogyas retaliated by driving a spear the size of a ship's mast through Hemron's belly. The two grappled, roaring like beasts, until both were mortally wounded. Their followers likewise tore into one another. What had been an army turned into a slaughterhouse of giants, slaying giants. In other places, quarrels erupting among the Nephilim over food or territory spiraled out of control. Whole camps of giants were found after the frenzy, strewn with massive corpses tangled in death. Those few giants who survived the initial bloodbath fled in confusion, only to encounter other bands of survivors and fight yet again. Gabriel's curse ensured that none would escape. The Nephilim's reign was ending in self-annihilation, fulfilling the divine judgment that they shall destroy each other in battle. I returned to my own encampment, where my family, my son Methuselah, my grandson Lamech, and young Noah among them awaited anxiously. They had trusted my wisdom and the warnings I had shared after my visions. Under my guidance, they had moved to higher ground and constructed a refuge as we could manage, though none of us yet fully grasped the scale of the coming deluge. It was enough that the Eternal Order had told us to prepare, and we obeyed. Looking out over the land from the hill of our encampment, I could see smoke rising from distant fires and hear faint echoes of conflict, the dying gasp of the old world's violence. But there was also an eerie stillness creeping in, as so many of the worst tyrants and monsters were now gone or in hiding. The corrupted civilization of that era was crumbling. With the Watchers gone and the giants nearly extinct, the oppressed peoples finally experienced a respite from terror. Some bloodied, traumatized survivors wandered toward any haven they could find, including our small camp. We took in who we could, sharing what provisions we had, though I knew soon none of it would matter. Something far greater loomed on the horizon. For the Eternal Order had cleansed the earth of the corruptors by sword and strife. Now he would wash the earth clean of the corruption itself by water. The final act was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Great Deluge. The appointed time of destruction arrived at last, in the 600th year of Noah's life. By then, the world had been given ample warning, both through the signs of judgment already unfolding, and through the preaching of Noah himself. For Noah, instructed by Uriel, had spent decades preparing a massive wooden ark, according to the Eternal Order's specifications. He worked diligently alongside his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, fitting its timbers, sealing its seams with pitch, and filling it with provisions. All the while, he warned anyone who would listen of the coming cataclysm. But his words largely fell on deaf ears. I often visited Noah during the construction, lending what wisdom and help I could. He was my great-grandson, and a more upright man I had never known. As he hammered planks or hauled beams, villagers and passers-by would gather to mock him. They laughed at the fool building a giant ship on dry land, miles from any sea. They taunted, calling him crazy, questioning his sanity. Old Noah has lost his mind. A flood to cover the world. Never. Some of the same people had once admired the Watchers and their false promises. Now they scorned Noah's true warning. Noah bore it calmly, replying only with gentle pleas. Please, turn from your violence and wickedness. Seek the Eternal Order, and you may yet find mercy. But this society steeped in corruption did not heed him. They could not fathom giving up their newfound pleasures and powers. They had seen the giants and Watchers fall, yes, but rather than repent, many simply descended into lawlessness or idolatry of other kinds. The thought of a divine flood wiping them all away was too fantastic for them to accept. Despite the jeers, Noah kept faith. Day by day the ark took shape, a 3-decked leviathan of a vessel, sturdy and sealed. When questioned what he was doing, Noah would answer, I am building a lifeboat for my family, and for any who would come under the Eternal Order's protection. Soon waters will cover everything. The crowds laughed harder. If the waters come, we'll climb the mountain. We'll save ourselves. We don't need your ark or your... The Eternal Order. I could only shake my head at their blindness. Finally, when Noah finished the ark, a curious event occurred. Creatures of every kind began to migrate toward Noah's land, as if drawn by an unseen beacon. Birds in great flocks darkened the sky, coming to rest upon the ark's railings. Beasts large and small emerged from the forests and plains, and trotted toward Noah's field in orderly pairs. Rabbits, foxes, deer, lions, serpents, lizards, all manner of animals, predators and prey alike, walked calmly side by side. The people of the nearby town gaped at this marvel. Some were struck with fear or awe at the sight. But even this miracle was not enough to soften most hearts. Under the Eternal Order's guidance, Noah and his sons led the animals into the ark, 2 by 2, and in some cases 7 pairs for certain clean animals meant for future offerings. I stood by and marveled as elephants lumbered up the ramp, as doves fluttered into cages, as wolves padded past sheep without incident. It was as if the peace of Eden briefly returned, a final echo before the storm. When the loading was complete, Noah extended a final invitation to his neighbors. I remember him standing at the huge doorway of the ark, calling out to the onlookers gathered, "Anyone who wishes to be saved, come into the ark now. The eternal order will shut us in soon." For a moment, there was silence among the people. Some of those who had mocked now shifted uneasily. The spectacle of the animals had made them question their certainty. A few seemed on the verge of stepping forward, but behind them, a cynical laughter rang out. A local strongman, one of the last surviving giant-blooded bullies, though not a full Nephilim, scoffed, "So we should all crawl into that wooden box like frightened mice. I'd rather die free than live caged." His bravado swayed the crowd back to skepticism. Others chimed in, "We've endured so much. What's a little rain? Noah is mad." In the end, not a single soul outside Noah's family entered the ark. With a heavy heart, I climbed down from the ark's entrance where I had stood with Noah. I gave my great-grandson a final embrace. "The time has come," I told him softly. He nodded, tears in his eyes but resolute. "Thank you, grandfather, for everything. The eternal order be with you." We both sensed that we would not see each other again in this world, for in that moment, I felt a stirring in my spirit. The eternal order calling me away from the doomed earth. My own task was finished. I had been a messenger and a witness, and now I was to be spared the coming devastation in a different way. Noah and his family, his wife, his sons and their wives, entered the ark, leading in the last of the animals. I stood back, atop a small rise nearby. The sky was now an ominous steel grey, clouds gathering unnaturally fast. A deep rumble of thunder rolled across the heaven. Then, before the eyes of the scoffing crowd, the enormous door of the ark began to close on its own. No human mechanism drew it shut. It was as if an invisible hand pushed it. With a resounding thud, the door sealed tight. I glimpsed Noah's silhouette through a small window high on the ark's side. Our gazes met one final time. I raised my hand in farewell, and blessing, fat droplets of rain started to pelt the ground. The bystanders looked up in surprise at the sudden downpour. A child squealed and laughed, enjoying the novelty of the heavy rain. But I perceived this was no normal shower. Each drop felt like a warning shot from the skies. I stepped away from the ark, my role now complete. Raising my arms, I prayed in the rain. "Oh, the eternal order, into your hands I commit my spirit. You have been my guide all these years. Deliver me now, according to your promise." As if in answer, a brilliant light engulfed me. One moment, I stood on the sodden hillside. The next, I felt myself being lifted, carried by a force not of this earth. Through the sheets of rain, I ascended. The last thing I saw of the world below was the ark, stout and silent amid the growing tempest, and clusters of people starting to scatter in confusion as the rainfall intensified. The eternal order took me from the earth, sparing me from the horrors to come. I did not taste death. One heartbeat, I was among mortals. The next I was in the realm of angels. Though I was not there in person to witness the deluge, the eternal order granted me a vision of it as I dwelt in his presence. Thus I recount now what befell the world on that terrible day, as it was shown to my spirit. Black clouds overflowed the sky, unleashing a torrent like no rain ever seen. The windows of heaven flung open, pouring water in unending cascades. Simultaneously, the earth beneath cracked and fountains of the deep burst forth, geysering columns of water from underground reservoirs. Rivers and lakes spilled over their banks within minutes. People who moments ago had been laughing now screamed in alarm. They fled for their homes, for high ground, for any shelter. But soon there was none to find. The water rose with uncanny speed. Streams turned to raging rivers, sweeping away huts, livestock, and human beings alike. I saw a knot of villagers pounding on the ark's hull, crying for Noah to let them in. Inside, Noah could only weep and pray, for the eternal order himself had sealed the door. With each passing minute, the throng outside grew smaller as individuals were pulled away by surging currents or gave up hope and swam for higher land. Village elders and warriors scrambled up hillsides. Here and there, families gathered on rooftops that were quickly encircled by churning brown water. Mothers held infants aloft, fathers tried to tie children to makeshift rafts or floating debris. Their efforts were tragically short-lived as the waters climbed relentlessly, houses were toppled, and even the tallest trees were engulfed. One by one, the cries of the drowning were silenced. For 40 days and nights the rains did not abate. The great flood waters joined with waves from the angry seas until every distinction between ocean, river, and land vanished. Even the giants, had any still lived to that point, would have been submerged. Their great height, no defense against a world now under water. I beheld one haunting scene. A group of desperate people and animals huddled atop a rocky knoll, which had become an island amid the vast flood. Among them was that boastful strong man who had mocked Noah. Now he clung to a rock, terror on his face as the rain pelted down. In his arms he held a small boy, perhaps a nephew or a neighbor's child, trying to save him from the rising surge. The man who once bragged of needing no to the eternal order was shouting a prayer into the storm, begging for deliverance. A monstrous wave crashed over the knoll, sweeping them into the abyss without mercy. Seconds later, nothing of that hill remained visible, only roiling water where moments before human lives had pled for help. All the world's lofty peaks and mountains were slowly swallowed. Days into the deluge, the ark itself was lifted from the ground by the swelling tide and began to drift. Inside, the ark's interior was pitched in darkness, save for oil lamps, and all inside clung to whatever they could, as waves buffeted them. Animals stomped and bellowed in their stalls, unsettled by the chaos. Noah's wife and daughters-in-law wept quietly, terrified by the cacophony beyond the wooden walls. Noah himself led prayers, reminding everyone that the eternal order was with them, even as the ark groaned under the strain. Eventually, nothing remained but an endless ocean of muddy, debris-strewn water. The beautiful green earth, with all its cities, farms, and works of man, was gone, washed clean. Floating corpses of men and beasts bobbed here and there amid broken timbers and uprooted trees. A solemn mist hung over the face of the deep. Under the heavy rain, silence ruled where once there had been singing birds, talking people, crying children. All air-breathing life outside the ark had perished. Thus the eternal order blotted out the corruption that the Watchers and their Nephilim sons had wrought. The slate was wiped clean, painfully, dramatically, but thoroughly. Only the ark remained, lone vessel on a world-spanning sea, carrying within it the seed of a new beginning. When at last the rains ceased and the floodwaters reached their zenith, the ark floated for months on the global ocean. Noah and his family waited patiently, tending the animals, sending out birds to test for land, as the waters gradually receded by the eternal order's command. In time, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. From the upper realms I saw the peaks emerge like dark islands, then broad land masses, as winds from the eternal order blew over the earth to dry it. Finally came the day Noah's family stepped out of the ark onto solid ground, beneath a clear rainbow-arched sky. They built an altar and offered sacrifices of thanksgiving. The smell of the offering rose to the heavens, and the eternal order placed a blessing on Noah's household, telling them to be fruitful and multiply, to refill the earth anew. He also set his bow in the clouds, a rainbow, as an eternal sign of his promise never again to destroy the world with a flood. Thus the world was reborn from the ashes of the old. The last traces of the Watcher's direct influence were gone, their mortal lovers and children dead, their cities ruined, their knowledge largely lost in the cataclysm. What remained of humanity would carry only echoes and legends of those ancient days into the new era. Chapter 9. Legacy of the Watchers. Epilogue. And so the tale of the Watchers draws to its close, as does my account. I have conveyed what befell those angels who broke the eternal order's law and the world they corrupted. From my vantage beyond the earth, for the eternal order took me into his keeping, I have reflected long on these events and committed them to record for the sake of those who would come after. In the new world born of the flood, Noah's descendants spread across the lands. They carried with them fragments of memory, stories of a great deluge, of giants and mighty ones who once walked the earth, of divine beings who fell for the love of women. In time, these memories became fragmented legends. Many forgot the true cause of the flood and the full extent of what happened. The Watchers, once so infamous, became a taboo subject, their very name sinking into obscurity. Later generations would speak of sons of the eternal order, who took daughters of men in only vague terms, if at all. In truth, there was a kind of divine mercy that the story of the Watchers faded from common knowledge. Those fallen angels had sought to glorify themselves on earth. Instead, they were buried in shame. It is fitting that their names were erased from the public scripture and records of most nations. Only in secret traditions, whispered among a few, or preserved by my own writings, handed down to Noah's kin, did the full account survive. If you are reading this, then you have found one such testament. Make no mistake, the influence of the Watchers did not vanish entirely. Traces of the forbidden knowledge humanity was never meant to have resurfaced in later civilizations. The art of war, the practice of sorcery, astrology and idolatrous crafts, these re-emerged as mankind's hearts strayed from righteousness again. This was largely due to those lingering evil spirits spawned from the Nephilim. They survived as unseen demons, whispering corrupt ideas to susceptible minds. As new civilizations arose, many humans began to worship false gods and mysterious powers, unaware that in many cases these were the very demons born of the Nephilim, masquerading as deities. Thus the legacy of the Watchers persisted in twisted form. Through idolatry and dark arts, those evil spirits gained the devotion of misguided people, even as the true story of the Watchers' fall was forgotten by the world at large. People who never knew the Watchers' story still fell prey to similar sins. Violence, vanity, lust for power, because that is the perennial struggle of the human heart. Yet without the Watchers physically present to amplify evil, never again would the entire earth fall under such total corruption so quickly. The flood had purged the world and set a limit on demonic influence, and the eternal order in his mercy made a covenant symbolized by the rainbow that the world would not be destroyed in such a manner again. Instead, humanity would be given time and guidance, through prophets and ultimately through a Redeemer, to resist evil. As for the Watchers themselves, their fate was sealed beneath the earth. To this day, those fallen angels remain in their lightless prison, bound in chains and awaiting the final judgment. Sometimes in the quiet of a spiritual vision, I fancy I can hear them far below, a faint chorus of muffled wails or angry howls echoing in the abyss. They know what is coming. At the end of days, when the great judgment arrives, they will be brought forth one last time to face the ultimate sentencing before the throne of the eternal order. Then they will be cast into the eternal fire, along with Satan and all forces of darkness, to be forgotten forever. What a tragic end for those once glorious beings. Created to be benevolent watchers and protectors, they are now cautionary tales of pride and lust. I cannot help but feel a pang of sorrow when I recall Samyaza's final cry, or Azazel's stubborn defiance. But their punishment was just, and they themselves understand this now, bitter though that understanding tastes. In my many journeys with the Eternal Order, both on earth and in the heavens, I have learned that no creature that rebels against the Creator escapes the consequences, and yet there is also a message of hope entwined with this grim story. For even as judgment fell, the Eternal Order provided a way for the righteous to survive in Noah's Ark, and for humanity to have a fresh start. The legacy of the Watchers thus stands as a dual lesson, a warning against transgression, and a reminder of divine mercy for those who remain faithful. You may wonder, dear reader, why this story was not passed down in the official holy books that most men know. As I mentioned, the scandal of the Watchers was largely expunged from common law, perhaps to keep people from dwelling too much on occult knowledge or from glamorizing those fallen beings. In the ages after the flood, as new nations rose, people spoke more of the heroes of righteousness and less of the errors of those angels. Only the briefest illusion survived in the records that the sons of the Eternal Order saw the daughters of men were fair, and that giants were on the earth in those days. The fuller narrative was set aside, deemed too dangerous or too fantastical for inclusion in the core teachings meant for all. Yet I, witness, seventh from Adam, inscribed this account for the sake of completeness and truth. I was there in person or in vision for much of it, and by the Eternal Order's commission, I became the chronicler of these extraordinary happenings. I entrusted my writings to my son Methuselah and to Noah, believing that someday in some era, those with wisdom would seek out this knowledge and learn from it. Perhaps that time is now as you read my words. What can we learn from the saga of the Watchers? Many things. We learn that beings, no matter how high or powerful, are not immune to folly when they forsake humility. The Watchers fell prey to temptation, carnal desire, pride in their knowledge, just as humans do. But because their station was higher, their fall was greater and more disastrous in scope. Their story underscores the sacredness of boundaries set by the Eternal Order. Boundaries between heaven and earth, between the divine and the mortal, which when violated unleash catastrophe. We also learn of the corrupting allure of forbidden knowledge. Some gifts, like technology and magic, were withheld by the Eternal Order for a season for humanity's own good. Introduced prematurely and without moral grounding, these secrets became cursed. Weapons led to war and murder. Cosmetics and jewelry fueled vanity and lust. Enchantments and astrology led men and women into bondage of superstition and demonic influence. Knowledge itself is not evil, but the Watchers tore it from the upper realms and handed it to unready humans, much like handing a sword to an infant. The result was bloody chaos. Furthermore, we see in the Nephilim the terrible consequence of crossing ordained orders of creation. The giants were never meant to exist, and their very being was a blasphemy against the natural law. They embodied excess giant appetites, giant egos, giant hatreds, and in the end they turned on themselves. Evil devours itself. The Nephilim's cannibalistic wars illustrated that profoundly. Yet, through all these dark lessons, the light of the Eternal Order's justice and grace shines. The Eternal Order did not allow evil to go unchecked. When the Watchers' sins reached their fullness, the upper realms intervened decisively. This assures us that no matter how dire things become, the Creator remains sovereign. Remember too that not all of heaven's Watchers fell into sin. Many of the holy angels remained faithful and still carry out the Eternal Order's will, watching over mankind in unseen ways. The folly of a few did not overthrow the order of the upper realms, nor did it thwart the eternal order's providence. He sees the cries of the oppressed. He notes every tear and drop of innocent blood. Though justice may tarry for a time, it will come, and when it comes, it is overwhelming. Conversely, the eternal order also saved the innocent, Noah and his family, showing that he remembers the faithful remnant. Noah's Ark is a symbol that even amid judgment, the eternal order provides a refuge to start anew. It is a promise that echoes through the ages. Those who walk with the eternal order, as I endeavored to, will ultimately be delivered from the worst of tribulations. I end this account not with certainty, but with memory. What you have heard is not scripture, nor prophecy, nor instruction. It is a story preserved in fragments, whispered, rewritten, and carried forward by those who lived in the shadow of what came before. Whether the watchers were angels, ancient rulers, or something stranger still, their fall left scars that did not fade easily. Long after the waters receded and the giants vanished, people still spoke of towering beings, of forbidden knowledge gifted too soon, of a world that nearly tore itself apart when boundaries were crossed. Some called these tales myth, others called them history. Most simply remembered them as warnings. I was there, or at least, I believe I was. I saw a world changed by power taken without wisdom, by desire unchecked, by knowledge unearned. I saw how even those who believed themselves eternal could fall, and how their children paid the price. If there is meaning in this tale, it is not for me to dictate. Perhaps it is only this, that not everything hidden is meant to be uncovered, and not every door should be forced open, no matter who stands before it. I seal this record so that the memory does not vanish entirely. Let the watchers remain where they belong now, in story, in shadow, and in caution. And if you choose to listen, then listen as you would to any old tale told beneath the stars. Not to worship it, not to obey it, but to remember. In later years, I composed this lament for the fallen watchers. O shining ones who in darkness fell, blinded by lust's seductive spell, bound now in chains in a lightless tomb, awaiting in fear the day of doom. Your giant sons brought blood and pain, so heaven cleansed the world with rain. May your tale be by the wise recalled. Pride and lust by the eternal order are always appalled. The end. Subscribe and comment. If this story stayed with you, tell me which part lingered the longest. Till next time,